Hello, everyone. I'm Simone Malinowski. Welcome to our Harris Bricken's continued series of webinars on foreign real estate investment. I'm Simone Malinowski, Managing Attorney of Harris Bricken's New York office. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Harris Bricken is an international full-service law firm with offices in a number of places, including New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, Beijing, and several other cities. This is a series of webinars that we are doing on information about investing in foreign real estate. Our previous webinars were investing in the US. This webinar is investing in Spain real estate as a foreign investor. I just want to quickly start and ask that make sure that you follow Harris Bricken on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. For today's webinar, we are joined by Harris Bricken's esteemed colleagues from Monterrey Meyer Abogados, which is a law firm based in Spain. Established in 1989, Monterrey Meyer Abogados is a full-service law firm with a specialization on cross-border business. They have close to 60 staff, including 35 lawyers, and offices in Barcelona, Madrid, and Palma de Mallorca. They advise and assist foreign enterprises when conducting their business in Spain. In addition to being qualified in Spain, their attorneys are qualified in a number of other jurisdictions and really specialize in advising in cross-border transactions. They are actually affiliated with Harris Bricken. There is a partner in both firms, Nadia Weitz, based in Barcelona, and Monterrey Meyer is the product of a strategic alliance. They have a US desk. We share a common business philosophy, and it's part of the reason why they are joining us today. In terms of their American desk, they guide companies and protect their economic interests in terms of investment and business activities in Spain, which we all view as an added value and competitive advantage from having a team of lawyers in both Spain and connections in the US with extensive knowledge of US law. So with that, I wanted to introduce each of the actual colleagues from Monterrey Meyer who will be speaking today. First, Monica, maybe would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes. Hello, Simon. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to hold this webinar with you. I was born in northern Spain, in Bilbao, and went to the German school. Then I decided to study law in Germany. And after obtaining my degree there, I joined our firm and have spent more than 15 years practicing international law here at Monterrey Meyer. My specialty is real estate. We've participated in important operations such as sale and purchases of industrial and logistic warehouses, shopping centers and retail parks. And I am involved usually in the acquisition process and also later in the asset management. This way, I have specialized in consulting lessors as well as lessees regarding lessees of commercial premises and offices. In this time, I have experienced the ups and downs of the Spanish real estate market of the last years and have gathered, I think, valuable experiences regarding these acquisitions and legal lease agreements for the setting up and negotiation of new lease agreements and renegotiating the conditions, what is now very important now because of the pandemic, for example.
Thank you, Monica. Yanis?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Yanis Amort. I'm a partner at our Madrid office in the departments of real estate and finance. I'm not Spanish. I'm originally from Germany. I took the bar exam in Germany, and after that I decided to move to Spain for private reasons. That was more or less 11 years ago. And I also took the bar exam here in Spain. So now I'm a German and a Spanish lawyer. And being a German lawyer, naturally, I advise many German clients, but also other international clients in the context of their business activities here in Spain. My clients are both institutional investors, but also private individuals. And yeah, I would say, or as Monica already said, with that background that we have quite a lot of experience on advising international clients and helping them with the problems and requirements they're confronted with here with their business activities in Spain. And also very, very happy that you invited us, and happy to join.
We're happy to have you. Thank you, Yannis. And Fernando?
Hello, good afternoon here in Spain. Good morning there in United States. Thank you to invite us to this webinar. I am Fernando González and I am a lawyer. I am Spanish. I born in Algeciras, Cádiz, but then I study law here in Madrid and at the University CEU San Pablo. And then I obtained master degrees in legal practice and corporate law, an executive master degree in urban and planning and zoning. I am specialized in urban law and real estate, and I have more than 7 years of professional experience in these areas. Through this professional life, I have dealt with international clients, advising them on a wide range of issues related to Spanish town planning, which, as we are going to see, is one of the most complex due to the territoriality of this law.
Thank you, Fernando. I think one of the reasons why we've done this series is that in every jurisdiction, real estate acquisition is just different. It's a very local and specialized type of law where industry knowledge on a very basic and local level is important. And we thought that it really couldn't have better people to talk about it than the three of you. And so I wanted to jump directly into kind of the topics that we were going to go over and some of the questions. And Yannis, this question is for you. How would you characterize the Spanish real estate market for a foreigner dealing with investing or acquiring real estate in Spain for the first time?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Spanish real estate market is, together with the markets in Germany, France, and UK, one of the biggest markets in Europe. However, Spain was not on the radar of international investors until 1986. That was the year when Spain joined the European Union. And due to this massive pent-up demand of the Spanish economy as a whole, especially in the late 90s and at the beginning of this century, the Spanish economy was just growing, and that applied, of course, also to the real estate market. Then, unfortunately, around 2010, the Spanish market or Spanish economy in general suffered a setback due to the international financial crisis. But since 2013, 2014, I would say the market is recovering, and during the last years, it has been growing again. So to characterize a bit the different asset classes or asset types in Spain, the most important one from a traditional point of view would be residential, retail, and office. With regard to residential, you should know that there's a really high ownership rate in Spain, almost 80% ownership rate, so that only few people actually rent their accommodation. But that's a situation that is probably going to change during the next years, as recently the prices are increasing quite a lot. And so especially for younger people, it is not possible or very difficult to acquire their own flats or houses. So new business models, for example, build to rent, are going to play a more important role in the next years. One sector that is especially for international investors very important is the office market. Here, especially the big business centers that are located in the greater Madrid area and the greater Barcelona area. Other regions in Spain are not that important because there's just not such a high office demand. Then retail is a big success, especially at the beginning of the century. Again, foremost in Madrid and Barcelona because of their higher purchasing power. So many shopping centers, retail parks, and other retail properties were built in these years. After the financial crisis, this sector suffered a bit more, and it took more time to recover. But recently, it was also growing again until the pandemic. Then Spain, as a typical tourist destination, of course, has a really strong hotel sector. This especially in the bigger cities, and then in the coastline of Spain, in the south of Spain, and on the islands, for example, the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean and the Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. And yeah, the last asset class that I would like to mention suffered a bit of a shadowy existence in the past, but in recent years was growing as well and was becoming more popular, and that is logistics. Of course, again, in Madrid and Barcelona with the ever-growing populations, but also in other regions. And here you could point out, for example, Zaragoza, which is located strategically between Madrid and Barcelona, but also the big harbor regions, for example, Bilbao or Valencia in the south.
So when you say logistics asset types, are you referring to kind of warehouses or kind of more commercial facilities?
Yeah, exactly. Especially warehouses, where we're growing a lot, like in the circles of 30-kilometer radius around Madrid and Barcelona. Although nowadays, what is becoming more attractive is also smaller logistic facilities in the city centers to cover the last mile to the client.
And that's probably a pretty good transition. Obviously, we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and it's had a significant impact on real estate and logistics and really kind of every aspect of every economy. In light of the ongoing pandemic, what impact did it have on the various types of assets that you've just gone through? And then kind of what's your opinion in terms of what development that we can expect moving forward as we hopefully transition out of the pandemic?
Yeah, of course, the impact of the pandemic has and continues to be quite strong. One of the losers definitely is retail, that suffered a lot because of the forced closures that lasted for several months in the last year. Also, the unknown situation between landlords and lessees, for example, with regard to the rental obligations of the lessee if the shops were closed, did not really help to calm the situation. So last year, not many investments materialize in the sector, and we are expecting that it will still take some time until this sector or this market recovers. On the other hand, as you said, of course, logistics, I don't want to say is a winner under these circumstances, but yes, logistics was definitely growing due to the increasing e-commerce. And in this regard, we are quite convinced that this growth will also continue after the pandemic has stopped, because the Spanish consumer really have adapted their habits, and that's not going to change once the pandemic is over. So logistics is going to play a more important role in the future. And as I said before, not only warehouses that are in the outskirts of the bigger cities, but also smaller solutions in the city centers to cover the last mile to the client. Then office, for example, last year it was considered a loser because everybody was convinced that office spaces, especially in the city centers, were not that important anymore, or will not be that important anymore, because we could all see that home office actually worked also on a big scale. However, this perspective has changed again during the last months, especially by the employees. There were some surveys here in Spain, and it results that more than 50% of the employees favor a mixed solution of 2 days of home office per week, and the rest of the week, so 3 days office time. Of course, the usage of office space is going to change. It's going to be adapted, having more spaces, common areas or shared areas. But the asset class itself, office, is not going to disappear, and it's going to play an important role also in the future.
And that's something that we've also seen on the US side and in New York in particular, which is it does seem like most employees favor kind of a hybrid model because it's really hard to replicate being in the office with your colleagues. And it does seem like people like that. And it's going to be interesting to see how office landlords kind of grow and change with that need. Now, a lot of our clients at Harris Bricken are American, and a lot of our viewers are American. And so one of the questions, and Fernando, this is for you, that I think lots of people are wondering is, right now, could an American investor buy property in Spain? And if so, are there any requirements from the Spanish authorities for direct investment by Americans into Spanish real estate?
Yes, of course it is. But before analyzing this circumstance from a legal point of view, I think it's important to point out a series of very simple recommendations that may seem obvious, but it's better not forget. First, visit the property or check its conditions, and then go to the land registry, cadastre, and city halls, and check its legal and town planning situation. All this in order to avoid uncertainties, mistakes, and possible surprise that may appear in the future if you are not sure about the purchase. That is why it's better to delegate all the tasks to an expert in the file who will analyze all the factors prior to a purchase. Now, yes, both natural and legal persons can own and exercise rights over real estate. The only essential requirement to buy a property here in Spain is for foreigners obtain the NIE, the Foreign Identification Number. It's a personal and unique number essential to carry out any transaction in the country, from opening a business to buying a property. You can apply for it in your country of origin or an Spanish embassy, or apply here directly in Spain. To obtain it, you need to submit an official application form, a justification of the application for this NIE. In the case of buying a flat in Spanish as a foreign, a private contract of commit of sale where a part of the price is already paid on account of the final price to be paid when the property is transferred, or any other document that certificate the reservation of the property. You have your valid passport and make a cash payment for a fee. In case of application through a representative, you have to need the original and copy of your identity documents of the owner, or representative are also required, as well the signed letter from the owner with the authorization. This identity number does not authorize legal residence here in Spain. It is not compulsory to open a bank account in Spain, but it will facilitate the payment of taxes and fees. A non-resident investor in real estate asset located in Spain, the total value of which exceeds 3,005,060 euros, must file a declaration using a pre-established form at the electronic headquarters of the Secretary of State for Trade and Investment Registry here in Spain. The deadline for submit the declaration is 1 month after the investment has been made. However, if the investment or liquidation, total or partial, in such asset comes from a country or territory considered to be a tax haven, this declaration must be filed regardless of the amount invest or liquidate. In addition, in such case, a prior declaration to the invest register offering investment must be made. So far, I have only referred to the case of investment in real estate. I have never mentioned the possibility of residence in Spain. However, for investors from not Union European countries, the purchase of a property in Spain in which you invest more than 5,000 may allow you to apply. 500,000, yes, may allow you to apply for a visa or a special resident permit for investors. We call a golden visa. With entities, you have a resident visa for the purchase of property in Spain for at less 500,000 euros. The application must be submitted no more than 90 days before the planned date of travel and allows the holder to receive and work through the national territory. I think the period of validity of this visa is 365 days if the purchase has already been formalized, or 6 months if the purchase has not yet been formalized. But there is a pre-contract with a guarantee of its fulfillment by means of a deposit or other means formalized in a public deed.
So one of the things that you just mentioned, I was just curious about, is when you apply for the government identification number, if you're going to make an investment, do you need to have a contract in place to purchase, for example, a flat before you apply?
You have to need a justificate. You have to say that you have be on a deal with a contract. You are part of this contract. So it's better to have a private contract with this thing to justify the application of this number, this identity fee number.
If I may jump in just a second. It's not necessary to already have something signed. It's just that at the moment of the application, the authorities are going to ask, okay, why do you apply for this number? Do you want to be a permanent resident? Do you want to invest, something like that? And then you have to say something, but actually nobody controls it. But it's not important or necessary to already have a signed contract.
So it's just generally broad justification for why you're applying.
Yeah, correctly. Many times, for example, it's also if you as a private person are going to become the CEO of a Spanish company, then you also need to apply for that number, and then of course you give this as a reason why you apply for it.
And I assume, like most government identifications, it's for tax collection purposes.
Yeah, later.
So
yeah, they got you controlled from the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you had mentioned, Fernando, is basically going and taking a look at land records prior to an acquisition. Monica, is there a specific system for registration in terms of land recording or recording the actual transfer of a property? And is that required as part of a transaction?
Yes. Ownership and other specific rights in Spain are recorded usually at the property registry. The property registry corresponding to the exact location of the real estate. The object of a property registry is only immovable property. Other acts or contracts concerning personal property cannot be registered, not at this property registry. This registry is a legal registry. It reports facts or circumstances such as, for example, the surface area or of the plot or of the building, but it has also legal effects. That is, it adds force to the legal act that is being registered. For example, a purchase that is not registered cannot be enforced against a purchase that has been registered. So it is very important to register the ownership and the transfer of the registry of the ownership. Registration is in many cases merely for declaration purposes and not mandatory, but there are important exceptions. For instance, mortgages, for example, they have to be registered to be legally valid. But this is not the case for the purchase of ownership. The persons in charge of these registry offices are property registrars. They examine the legality of the property transactions before recording them in the registry. And once these transactions have been entered in the registry, they will be protected by the state as an official truth. So the property registry has been created to attest to the property owner's identity and any existing encumbrances on the property. If you have you get the information of the registry, it will report a single ownership for each piece of property. The state guarantees that the registered title holder is the true owner and that there are no encumbrances or other charges than those that are disclosed in the registry. There is also a system of coordination between the notary offices and the registry. Before the notary authorizes a purchase deed, he must first fax the property registrar and ask for the information of this property. Therefore, in our opinion, Spanish property titles are very secure as long as they are registered in the property registry, which is not necessary. Generally, parties may execute a verbal agreement concerning the transfer of the property, and this would be sufficient and valid. However, as we have seen, it is highly advisable to register this contract in the property registry. Recording the purchase contract at the property registry requires a notarial contract. A private contract is not sufficient for this. This we call the public deed, the escritura pública. And as we have seen, it is very important to register this public deed also in time to avoid any rights of third parties that they are registered before the property title.
Which is very similar to the system we have, which is first in time. It's for everyone. I think it's good practice to record a conveyance of ownership as soon as possible.
Yes, the date and the time of the presentation of the deed at the property registration. This happens in a way of a notification by the notary. This entry gives the purchase a rank of priority regarding rights that could be presented after this entry. Priority means that the right registered first takes preference over any rights registered later. For example, as a protection against the double sale of the property by the seller, for example, or liens or enforcement measures that could be registered after the transfer of the ownership. These cannot be enforced against the buyer. The principle of priority is one of the most important effects of this registration system, and therefore is also a very important task for the lawyer and the notary to control that this happens and this happens in time.
So that's, I think, a pretty good transition, because you know, I think for a lot of the people who are listening today, you know, we're kind of talking about what the process is like investing for the first time in Spanish real estate. And so, you know, one of the things that we regularly talk about on these webinars is kind of assembling the right group of people around you. So for someone who's considering investing in real estate in Spain for the first time, you know, what types of advisors or people should they bring together in terms of making the process as streamlined as possible and put them in the best position for the investment to be successful?
Well, usually investors consult estate agents if they're searching for a property. In Spain, anyone is able to work as an estate agent. Nevertheless, there are official estate agents with a quality seal. So this provides these professionals with a degree of respectability.
And just an estate agent in Spain is, I guess, the equivalent of a broker in the US.
Yes.
So someone who will know real estate and be able to basically act as the middleman between buyer and seller. Exactly.
And this anyone can make this, but there are official brokers. They have like a quality seal. They have studied and they have knowledge, and so you can rely a little better on them than other brokers. Then strongly recommended for us is to appoint a lawyer to guide the investor or through the process and to protect its interest. In our opinion, it is sensible to ensure that the lawyer has no financial connection with the estate agent, with the broker or the developer of the building, for example. so that he will be neutral by negotiating and by making due diligence. The lawyer will be able to carry out a legal due diligence prior to the completion of the purchase. And by a legal power of attorney, the lawyer can also act on behalf of the buyer, which can be interesting to reduce costs, for example, for international investors, that they do not need to travel often to Spain. And the lawyer can get the tax identity number we have spoken about, and for example, help also by opening a bank account. The entire process of signing the public deed or a private contract, and until the final registration in the property registry, can be covered by a power of attorney. We as lawyers, we study the legal aspects of the real estate and inform, of course, the investors of possible risks we see, but we also coordinate the due diligence process with other professionals that may assess the investor, for example, technical teams or economic consultants. This is, of course, depending on the transaction we are starting. Very important, in our opinion, can be the assessment by a tax specialist in order to plan the investment and eventually save costs. And in case the investor wants to finance the acquisition, we lawyers usually examine the loan contract and the mortgage conditions. And often, for example, for international investors, they contact agents specialized in loans to search for a good loan for them. The physical examination of the property by an architect can also be very advisable. It depends, of course, in the investigation of the property. And there we often collaborate with architects, also by smaller purchases, because sometimes irregularities or possible illegalities of the building may arise in our due diligence, and there have to be taken into account technical issues that are often then too specialized for us as lawyers. Yeah, of course, the notary, we have already mentioned them. And sometimes we lawyers also make inquisitions and get information directly from the city council or other state offices regarding the property, for example. This would be for me the big team for the investor.
So, Giannis, when you were first talking about what the various asset types are in Spain, you kind of emphasized that things are somewhat different in Barcelona and Madrid than they would be in other places, which is no different than it is in the US when talking about New York City versus upstate New York. So Fernando, this is a question for you regarding urban planning in Spain. Is there any particular legislation that applies in terms of urban planning, and does it depend on the location of the property?
Well, it's a very complex matter, involves many official bodies. I am going to talk first of all about the organization of Spain into the territorial entities, because it is a basic premise for understanding urban planning law in Spain. We are going to consider 3 territorial levels. The first territorial level is the Spanish government. The second level is the regional governments, called here autonomous communities, and the third territorial level are the cities, the municipal governments. Spain is made up of 17 autonomous communities and 8,135 municipal governments. An autonomous community is a territorial entity which within the Spanish constitutional legal system is endowed with autonomy, with its own institutions and representative and certain legislative, executive, and administrative power. And this is the most important, because the autonomous communities are organized into province and municipalities, cities. From an organizational point of view, the institution of government and administration of the municipalities are the city halls. The city halls provide a series of basic services to their residents, such as drawing up the town planning regulation for each municipality. Special planning try to achieve an appropriate relationship between population, territory, activities, service, and infrastructures. Understanding this division is important because town planning is a matter of public function that it is exercised by the public administration, by official bodies. The competences of the Spanish government and the autonomous communities is this area of town planning can be exclusive or shared. The municipality exercise competence in the planning, management, execution, and discipline of town planning in the terms provided for in legislation of the Spanish government and the autonomous communities. This means that the basic elements of town planning are framed within a legal system that includes legislation and autonomous community legislation. The Spanish government regulates the basic condition of land or ownership, both in terms of rights and duties, and has power in certain matters that are called sectorial and was objective in the protection of certain specific areas of the territory, such as roads, railways, ports, airports of general interest and coast. For all these reasons, the land law, la ley del suelo, is a Spanish government law that regulates the right and the obligation of landowners in Spain. It is the cornerstone of urban planning law, and it regulates the right to build and the value of land. Then the autonomous communities, for their part, have exclusive competence over urban planning, spatial planning, and housing. In other words, they dictate laws, regulation, planning, management, and the protection of urban legality. Each autonomous community has its own law. I have so that we have 17 communities. So we have 17 different kinds of law, where depend of what part of Spain you are. So finally, the municipal corporations are competent to define the political objectives behind any urban planning policy. They are also responsible for drafting directly or through technical assistance municipal planning. They are also competent to approve development planning instrument. Here, the most important is the municipal development plan, to assume their execution in the case of public management, or their control in the case of management by private initiative, and to ensure respect for legality in the execution of urbanization and build and change in land use, and also granting of license and the imposition of sanctions. The basic regulatory instrument of the municipal government to fulfill the urban planning competence is this municipal plan, which allows for the regulation and organization of the entire municipal territory. The municipal plan is the basic technical instrument of urban planning, in which the territory structure of the municipality is established, and which contain the strategy of action that over time result in a model of organization and growth of urban space and the structuring of the land uses of the municipality as a whole. It is therefore a document of a normative nature that determines the planning model that set the global objectives and strategies for the sustainable development of the municipal territory. Preserve, protect land, indicates the extent of land uses, specific the characteristic that buildings must have according to the use, and activities that characterize the city and the historical and social structure of its urban habitat. And foresees the intervention of reform, renovation or rehabilitation, and finally organize the programs, the management of its execution. Sorry. For all these reasons, the city where a property is located will be a fundamental issue. It is a piece of land. It will determine its urban characteristics according to the municipal plan and in accordance with the possible protection law that we have mentioned. We will be able to develop it in a certain way for a certain use with specific characteristic. So if it is a property that has already been built, we can see what use it can have and what activities could be developed on it.
So one of the things that I think is part of real estate investment in general is always a big issue is financing acquisitions. Giannis, is there anything in particular that needs to be considered as part of financing a real estate acquisition in Spain? particularly with respect to foreign investment?
Well, in general, I would like to point out that there are no express limitations as to who may provide financing in Spain. Just that the different providers have to comply with a specific regulation applicable to those providers. For example, bank entities have to comply, of course, with the banking regulations and the supervision of the Bank of Spain. But apart from that, there are actually few restrictions. For example, it would be possible for an US investor to bring its own financing from a US bank, purchase the property in Spain with that loan that was taken out in the United States and under US law, and then maybe secure this foreign financing agreement by establishing a mortgage over the property in Spain. That's no problem at all. And what should be taken into account, what a financing provider or a bank would always ask in the context of a financing of property acquisition, is they will always ask for a mortgage, because it gives them a direct instrument to enforce their loan in case of non-fulfillment by the borrower, and by means of foreclosure or forced administration of the property. And as Monica already mentioned before, a purchase contract, for example, it's not necessary to sign it in a public deed. A verbal contract or a private document is sufficient. But the mortgage is actually one of the few legal documents in Spain that has to be formalized in a public deed and to be valid, and it has to be registered with a property registry in order to be enforceable. In addition to mortgages, banks usually ask for additional securities, such as pledges over shares or bank accounts, or if it is a private person, then a personal guarantee. But the mortgage definitely is the most important guarantee and security.
So we are quickly getting close to the hour mark, and I know that we have a number of questions that we had on our topics, but I did quickly want to get to a few of the questions that our listeners submitted. One of them, and we were discussing kind of the NIU registration. Is it if a company rather than an individual is going to purchase real estate in Spain, are they required to obtain an NIE in order to purchase the property?
Yes, it's the same obligation. In case of a company, it's not the NIE number, but the NIF. But it's actually the same system. The company, before being able to carrying out business, open a bank account, whatever action they want to take in Spain, they would need to apply for such a number as well.
And that makes sense. It's similar to the system that we have here. Another question that we had come in, which all of us have had to deal with, which is closing on real estate transaction in person versus remotely, particularly given the pandemic. In Spain, is it possible to purchase property remotely through a power of attorney, or does it need to be done in person or specifically with the individual who is acquiring the property?
No, it's perfectly possible to carry out the whole transaction via a power of attorney. It just has to be granted before a public notary in the country of origin, and it needs to be. It also needs the Hague apostille. Otherwise, it would not be recognized by the Spanish notary, for example. But apart from that, there are no restrictions with regard to the usage of a power of attorney. And as Monica said before, you can use it to sign private contracts, to apply for the NIE or NIF number, to sign the public deed before a notary, and to register later the public deed in the property registry.
Well, so speaking of registrations, particularly because the majority of our audience is interested in investing as foreigners. Are there any additional registration requirements for American or non-EU citizens if they're considering buying residential property as an investment? So, you know, either as a short-term or a long-term rental.
No, in general, there are no additional restrictions or requirements. I think if the investment is higher than a certain amount of money, I think it's about 3 million euros, then you have to give notice to the Ministry of Industry or Economy here in Spain. But this is just a formal notice to inform the authorities that you're going to invest a certain amount of money in Spanish territory. But no further requirements are set.
So when we're kind of talking about, you know, obviously as part of a real estate transaction, there's the actual costs to acquire real estate. But then as part of any sort of transaction, there's always the additional expenses that someone has to incur. Monica, are there, in terms of considering a real estate investment in Spain, any mandatory or compulsory expenses that investors have to take into account?
Yes, there are a range of expenses and of course taxes that must be taken into account and paid even before you can register the acquisition in the property registry, for example. One expense to consider when buying a property, it's the notary fees. These fees are regulated by the state. This means that every notary charges the same fees for the same work. There's only a little bit that you can negotiate, but the fees are principally the same. And the same applies to the costs for registering at the property registry. These costs, these fees are not very high. That's not the problem of the of the whole acquisition costs. For example, at the notary, if the investor is doesn't speak Spanish, or the notary will prove if he can understand the public deed. If that's not the case, you can have, if you have not a power of attorney or a lawyer or someone acting for you, representing you, you can have a translator, so that would be an additional cost, of course. But this translation is also a work that we lawyers often assume. Even normally the notaries accept this. And yeah, the fees, of course, the taxes. The taxes will depend whether the property is new or secondhand. But I think my colleague Yanis wanted to give more details in this regard. We are both no tax specialists in our firm, but maybe a little more information. I think what we usually say in Spain, it's you have to count with approximately a percentage of 10 to 12% of the purchase price for the expenses. For notary and registry and taxes. It will depend, of course, of the purchase price, where the property is located in Spain, then different taxes would apply, for example. But it's, of course, there are not big differences. So between 10 and 12%.
That's great. That's a good ballpark. We are unfortunately running into our hour mark. So there are a few questions that were still outstanding, and what we'll do is, as a follow-up to this webinar, put together some of those questions and publish a blog post that answers them as best we can. I want to thank all of you for joining us today and participating. Giannis, Monica, and Fernando, this has been fantastic. A quick reminder to follow Harris Bricken on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and also to subscribe to our blogs, the China Law blog, the Canada Law blog, and the Harris Bricken blog. Thank you all again for joining today, and to all of our listeners, thank you for participating.